Some 25 years ago, I was running a household of 3 growing, always hungry boys who ran in age from middle school into junior high school. And in that household, I was doing the regular things a woman would do, plus some things that a lot of women don't do anymore. Besides that, I gardened, and I did heavy-duty canning and freezing, and I taught Bible classes, and I loved what I was doing. But I was aware that something was changing. I could sense it. You got hints of it in the media, in the newspapers. The women I knew were going to work. And they still had children at home. And then it got into my own head enough that he started saying to me, Marlene, maybe you're not pulling your own weight. Maybe there's something else you ought to be doing to add significantly to the income of this family. Because we were facing 2 boys going to college at the same time very soon. And there was preaching. Adequate, but not a big amount of pay. We lived carefully. I know how to live carefully. But that I had begun to feel, and by the way, I resolved my doubts, and I decided what was the better thing to do, and I'm more glad than I can say. But I want to talk to us about what brought those doubts. I want to talk to us about what God says, first of all, and then explore some of the causes of what has happened to our nation, what has happened to the home, and why women have chosen, almost universally now, to do this. And they've still got children at home. And I want to look at the opposition in order to see its flaws clearly. And to give us courage, and for you young women raising your children, do not be intimidated by what you feel around you. And you can be great influence to others. In the first place, let's look at what God says. Let's turn to Titus, the 2nd chapter. Or you don't have to turn there if you want to, but I'm sure you're familiar with the context there. Paul has instructed Titus in this book. Titus is a young preacher, and he has been told in the cities of Crete to take care of the things that are lacking in the churches there. This included appointing elders, and qualifications for elders are given in the 1st chapter. The 2nd chapter begins with admonition to the older men, concludes a few verses later with admonitions to the young men, and in the middle of all that, admonitions to older women and young women. And to older women, it is spelled out, you are to be reverent women. And a lot could be said about that for our purposes for right now. I won't. But and this is not a pick and choose, shall I be a woman who does this? No, it says, you older women, this is what you are to become, to grow into, to be able to do, to be example, and to be teachers of good things, that you may school the young women in various traits in their character, including for our purpose this morning, to be, and the words really, if you get back to just exactly what the word is saying, husband lovers, children lovers, workers at home. Other versions say homemakers, keepers at home. So the instruction that these older women are to give, to school the young women in, to married women, is to be husband lovers, children lovers, be workers at home. And one authority, Reinecker, says that he believes this is talking about the schooling that the older women are to do to the young women. This is not talking about classroom situation, as we're doing right now. I see no reason in the world to conclude that this situation is anything to be criticized. If a woman can teach one woman, can she not teach two? Can she not teach 50? But this particular kind of thing and the adequacy of the task at hand lends itself for the most extensive usefulness to a young woman, to a privacy situation. One-on-one, one older woman schooling a young woman. So, however, that is the more comprehensive way to do it. You can get a lot done with a word. This is true. Then I want us to think about 1 Timothy 5:14, and of course this is where Floyd got the words for the subject matter, managing the household. I'm going to turn that into sort of ruling the household, because the clear definition of the word there is the word rule. It means manage. It means run it. But I'm going to refer to it commonly as ruling the household. And the background in 1 Timothy, the 5th chapter, is instruction regarding widows specifically. And for women who had reached a certain age, whose lives had been characterized by certain traits, and who were bereft of anybody else to financially take care of them, then they were to be enrolled in the number that is supported by the church. They had no one to support them. They had fulfilled qualifications of duties and service in their life and faithfulness to God and of a certain age. But you young widows, Paul said to Timothy, and again, these are instructions written to a young preacher in what he is to teach. You young women, however, marry. He said, I desire that you marry, bear children, rule the household. The temptation for young women who have been married is, as the text points out, to become wanton against Christ, to forsake the Lord, in their idleness, to be gossips and busybodies, and then, after all, desire to marry. They have known sexual intimacy, and temptation will be great for them. Paul said, you marry, bear children, and rule the household. Again, this is to you women, you married women with children, your place is to rule the household. We think of the word rule often, I think, in a very limited concept. First of all, I want to tell you about the word, though, here that is used in the text. Despite Floyd's start, don't ever use any Greek. I don't even know Greek. I have a granddaughter who's studying Greek. But anyway, I do know, I've heard my husband enough, I know this word, and then you can pick up your book and you can see the word that means this. But if you just took the word here for ruling the household, it's a compound word which is saying house despot. Of course, part of the word is about the house. The other part is the word that we get the English word despot from. House despot. And that's not a bad connotation there. We can think of despots as, tyrant. No, to get an idea of the flavor of the word, remember Jesus' parables? So often he would say, a certain householder did such and such, the master of the house. And in these instances, it would be the man that he's talking to or telling about in that context, but it's the same word. It's the same word that's translated here for the women to be to rule the household. And from that we see it is an honorable position. It is not a position to be looked down on. It is a respected responsibility in spite of what the world wants you to think today. And as I said, the flavor of any word, or rather our concept of having such a single or limited meaning to a word, we can see in our English words. You take the word fast. What does fast mean? It means quick. It means tight. Tie it up tight. Make it fast. It means to go without food. Take the word quick. What does quick mean? It means fast. It also means alive. The quick and the dead in the King James Version are cut to the quick. So words have different meanings. Words certainly have different shades of meanings. little small variations in meanings. And to get an idea about this, I want us to look at two chapters earlier in the same book, because we're taught, all right, the woman is to rule the household. Yet we know the husband is to rule the wife. She is to be in subjection to him. How is this? And yet she rules the household. And I've known men in the past that, well, that bristle at the very thought that the woman is to rule the household. And so how does all this fit together? Does this put her somehow in some position? No, not at all. In 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, in the qualifications for elders, it speaks about a man being able to rule his own household. One who rules his own house well, having his children in subjection with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? And the word there that is translated rule is not the same word that's used, you women rule the household. It's a different word. And what it means is to stand before, hence to lead, attend to, indicating care and diligence. And I want you to remember that last part, indicating care and diligence, because that's very obvious in the wording of verse 5. But this is a word that means to stand before, to lead. There's a different flavor in the meaning of this word than the word that is used, rule the household. This rule, you stand in front of it all. It's the buck stops here. You pay attention to what is going on, and with care and diligence. And as it says, this is how the elder is supposed to rule the church, because if he doesn't know how to rule his family, and that meaning to stand before it all, to lead, to attend to, how shall he take care of the church of God? There's the care and diligence inherent in the meaning of the word. If he doesn't know how to do it with care and diligence, he cannot do it. He cannot be effective. So as the body, the church, the members of the body, the church, as they go about doing their work, the elders stand before it all. They lead while the body does its work. The woman in the household, she does the work, she organizes, she has initiative, she takes care of the responsibilities. Her husband, her head, stands before it all. The buck stops there. And he is aware and attends to, and he pays attention to what is going on. But there's still something that I see as a paradox in all of this. Genesis 3:16. When Adam and Eve sinned, and God pronounced the punishments that they would have to bear, and that have transferred to us all, it is said, her desire shall be to her husband, and he will rule over her. Her desire shall be to her husband. So she's going to desire that which will rule her. And it almost seems, doesn't it, well, it should be then, her desire shall be to her husband, yet he shall rule over her. That's not what it says. And he shall rule over her. It's not presented as a contrast. It's not presented as something different or in disagreement. Those two pieces of the puzzle. And after all, we can think, why was this so? Why would it be that God put the husband, well, I don't know. He was made first. There's some things. But if you think about it, who was it who was deceived? The scripture tells us the woman was deceived. And you know, the woman has a terrific influence upon her husband. That is there with Eve. She has a terrific influence upon her husband. The world seems to think this is not true. She does. Maybe God set it up this way, perhaps partly to temper her influence. Because her influence is proverbial with her husband. Maybe that influence needed some tempering. But God, in his wisdom, said, Her desire shall be to her husband, and he shall rule over her. Now then, in Ephesians, the 5th chapter, there is an explanation of how this is accomplished, that he rules over her. Ephesians, the 5th chapter, verses 23 and 24. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject, and I want you to notice the predicate there, just as the church is subject to Christ. Now, the predicate is not repeated in the next phrase. The predicate goes with both phrases. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Is subject, and again, I learned this from my husband. I have learned a lot from my husband. Because I can't read Greek. You can look it up and confirm it, and you're in your book. That predicate there, is subject, is in the middle voice in the Greek. And what that means is that it is a choosing to be subject. It is a placing oneself in subjection. It is talking about, I choose this. I make this choice. I volunteer this willingly. I place myself. It's as though I say, I hit myself, not I hit you, or you hit me. I hit myself. I place myself under subjection to my husband. And it's borne out in many places, commonly in the Scripture, that this is the way the church is subject to Christ. Psalm 110 just says it in those very words. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies the footstool of thy feet. Rule thou in the midst of your enemies. And in the second verse, thy people shall be volunteers in the day of thy power. Your people shall be volunteers. Another version says, your people shall be willing in the day of your power. Christians, we subject ourselves unto the Lord voluntarily, willingly. We place ourselves under his subjection. Just so the wife is to place herself under subjection. It is not that the husband has his foot on her throat or a tyranny. God says, he shall rule her. Her desire shall be to him, and he shall rule her. What graciousness in our Father's teaching. She shall place herself. She shall choose. That is what she does. And after all, if she is in subjection only by force, what kind of subjection would that be? I mentioned Proverbs 31. That's the classic picture of a woman ruling her household. And what's God's assessment of her? Her value is above rubies. Don't be intimidated. Fundamentally, the foundation of all her character was, as it said in the latter verses, she fears God. Because of her fear of God, she is what she is. And by the way, I'm told that in the Hebrew, these verses all begin first with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and then the next one with the next letter, and on down, and people have conjectured why, and, well, it would make it easy to memorize. But anyway, this woman would do her husband good and not evil all the days of her life. And one author said she is oriented toward her husband. He shall have no lack of gain because of her. The old King James Version says he has no need of spoils. You know, you read the history of Israel, and when they went to battle against the Amalekites or whoever, in the case of the Amalekites and Saul, they were forbidden to bring back anything, and that was his problem. But ordinarily, they are allowed to bring back spoils. Her husband has no need of spoils. Or in the New King James, he has no lack of gain. And because of this, the heart of her husband trusts her. She is responsible. She takes initiative. She executes her initiatives. She is a decision maker. She is ruling the household. She takes charge. She is in charge. And a good deal, because she is such a woman, says her husband is known in the gates. He has prominence as a judge among the people. Didn't mean he was loafing down there at the gates and drinking coffee. He was an elder, it would have been an elder possibly among the people. That's where judgments took place. If your son was accused, if you accused your son of being rebellious, you brought him to the gates, and the judgment was made. The king would even, on the occasions you can read about, the king would come to the gates, and that's where the judgments were made. She is the responsible one running that household. Her husband can be out doing the things that the man needs to be doing. I want to look at her qualities now, as briefly as we can, to make some points, not delve at length into each one. I'm sure you've studied it many, many times. But just to call attention to some things, this woman was expert in homemaking skills. She spun. She apparently then did the weaving after the spinning. So therefore sewing, therefore gardening, planting a vineyard. She bought land, planted a vineyard, food. She was up while it was still night, providing meat to her household. She had servants, of course. This was a woman of some wealth. But you and I have servants. Maybe not as good as those. We have electric servants. Ours aren't. We can't do it as much on the same scale that she did. But her homemaking skills, those things are valuable. You know, home economics used to be taught in the schools. If you didn't learn it at home, you could learn it at school. And I think that's gone by the board mostly. I hear, in fact, young women say, well, there's nothing to do at home. It's boring. And the problem there is they don't know what could be done. They don't know what should be done. And maybe they're not totally at fault in this. And they wouldn't know how to do it if they knew what should be done. And so then you hear the excuse. If you don't hear it in words, you see the evidence of this as offered as an excuse. I'm intellectual. I don't waste my time and my brains on drudgery. As though working, beautifying, making things is as opposites with intelligence. Consider this older woman unintelligent. The skills that a wife can know in the area of home economics, the things that she can do, can contribute to so much to a household. She can teach these things to her daughters. She can be a more hospitable person. And that's something that is required of us. If she knows how to cook, if she knows how to do the sewing in the house, to clothe her family, to make the house pleasant by the skills that she has. Just got a book, Nina's Journey, a memoir of Stalin's Russia and the Second World War. I brought it with me for more than just this. I'm going to read you a passage from it about their propaganda about what the woman's role should be, and you'll recognize it exactly as what's happening here. But she recounts as to how You were ridiculed if you embroidered anything because you were a parasite. Doing embroidery is worthless. It doesn't make any money. And you were a parasite to society if you did any embroidery. And I'm not talking about in a household, making this household, while I am saying make your household pleasant. That's her job. Is in the women, when they finally got to the West and tamed the Wild West, put curtains on the windows, brought a piano in the house. Not talking about Architectural Digest opulence, or even Southern Living, or Victoria Magazine. They're beautiful, opulent, beyond one's dreams. But I'm talking about my mother-in-law, Mom Smelser, grew up in a household that I think would have been like this. There wasn't a whole lot of money, but her mother had a white tablecloth on the table every Sunday and got up and killed a chicken and fried it on Sunday morning. Now, I can't imagine doing that. And had people over for dinner, for Sunday dinner. Hospitality has died, and I don't think the men are responsible for it. It's us women who are responsible for it. It takes time, it takes work. And we need to be able to have the time and the energy and the wisdom to do it. Who will cook for somebody who's in need? Who will cook for someone when there's been a death? Who will cook when there's been, I've forgotten what things I say, for all the occasions, when that is a useful thing to do. The uniquely feminine abilities are valuable. Don't be intimidated by the world around you. Besides that, these household skills, one who is not a practitioner cannot imagine how much more cheaply you can live if you know how to do things at home. It makes a tremendous difference. Women today would have no idea how much difference it can make. This woman was like the merchant ship. She brought her food from afar. What is that saying? It has to be something to do, the only thing I can think of, or anything I've looked up, has to do with finding a bargain or quality. She put the effort into it to do it. And it's obvious she was a hard worker. And I have read the very words in articles written by women in the newspapers, in the Bergen Record back in Bergen County, New Jersey. Speaking of my career, this is women who have children now. I want to be able to work as hard as I want to. That's the only way you can work hard. This woman, she was lazy. She had commercial ability. She bought a field and she planted a vineyard. She may not have dug a single hole herself. Remember, she had servants. Or she may have. She was directing that. This was a part of what she was doing in running that household. Plant a garden, grow something. She was industrious. She made and sold garments. She made some money from the things she was doing in that household. Cottage industry she had going. We'll talk about that more extensively in a minute. She was charitable. She was interested in doing what she could regarding the poor. And I'll read in a minute here where, nope, that would be forsaking your own interest. You do not do that if you're going to be a modern woman. She made clothing for her family, whether you make it, whether you buy the used shops, whether it's hand-me-downs, whether you shop the sales, to be thrifty in providing clothing for your family. As far as spiritual training that this mother did, the chapter there in Proverbs is not as specific with it as it is these other things. It says her wisdom and kindness was on her tongue, and she was overseeing the ways of that household diligently. Now that says a lot. It's not a lot of detail. But you think of Lois and Eunice, grandmother and mother of the young preacher Timothy. He knew the scriptures from a babe. And how did he know it? It was from his mother and his grandmother, the scripture says, that he learned the scriptures. The result of all this was that the husband and the children of that woman called her blessed. Women who leave their children in daycare and go to work every day, and they glory and get some great satisfaction, it seems, in the recognition of their co-workers. Can that in any way match husband and children calling you blessed? What matters if the world knows some recognition from your co-workers? What does that matter when you're old and retired? And what good did that do? But to be called blessed by your husband and your children. Well, what a scene that is, that worthy woman. And how can it be that that is all rejected these days? How can it be that people would turn against that? What are the forces that would fight against it? First of all, the Industrial Revolution. You think about it, with mass production, with centralized location, you had to go off to the factory or go off to the office building, whatever. You went away from home to go to work, and you were there for several hours. It's reduced now considerably from what it would have been formerly, down to 8. All that has had an effect. Mother was taken out of the home. She went away. Well, it wasn't until World War II came along that they went away in large numbers. But the Industrial Revolution had already set the machinery in place to accommodate that movement. And then World War II came along, and how many of you have heard of Rosie the Riveter? The hands. We older women, I've read about and heard about and then ended up seeing pictures of Rosie the Riveter. Rosie was not an actual flesh and blood woman. She was a cartoon character, I guess you would see. On posters, it was propaganda. If you were patriotic, you went to work because the men were away at war and somebody's needed to man the factories or woman the factories in that case. So Rosie the Riveter, she did the rivets in the metal, building airplanes and whatever. So the women went to work. It's a patriotic thing to do. And they got used to it. And they liked it. Read an article in one of American history of these women. Oh, they loved it. Their children, somebody else, I don't know what they did with their children in that instance. She liked it. And there's more money. More money. And naturally, the Industrial Revolution with mass production and all of this, people were able to have more money than people had ever had before. Unprecedented prosperity came along. And what did that produce? Materialism. We want the money. But first of all, I forgot one more point that must be made. A part of that result of the Industrial Revolution, the centralized location for working, was the power of labor unions and then their power to affect government regulation. This discouraged competition. We don't want anybody competing with our jobs. And so regulation, zoning, licensing, taxing was put on anything that you would do at home. And I remember not many years ago reading about, hearing about, in Vermont, some surviving cottage industry was effectively shut down by labor unions and government regulations. So, now then, if you're going to bring in any income from work, you see, you've got to go away and be gone all day. None of that's God's fault. But you know, with the arrival of the computer age, that does bring in some possibilities that if a woman does have the time, is not neglecting her children and her other duties, then she can at home do some things that she can bring in some income if she desires or if it's needed. But as I said, this unprecedented prosperity that it resulted from the Industrial Revolution brought materialism, and that is a tremendous enemy to women being at home. There's a financial writer by the name of Scott Burns, and several years ago he observed in our culture, work that does not bring in a paycheck is not valued. Work is not valued that does not produce a paycheck. It's obvious. If you stay at home and take care of your own children, you're poo-pooed as a rather worthless person and wasting your time. You could be doing other things. If you have a daycare center and take care of other people's children and get paid for it, the picture suddenly changes. And you are held in a different light. Why? Nannies, I dare say nannies, are higher on the totem pole these days than the mother who stays home and raises her own children. Don't be intimidated. Homeschoolers. You stay at home, you're intelligent, and you work, and you're teaching your own children history, literature, Shakespeare, science. You're teaching your own children. I've got some grandchildren that are learning some of those things at home. Are you respected? Did you have the same elevated respect that the school teacher has down at the school building? No, you don't. I know well you don't. No. They want to look down their noses at you. What's the difference? Work that is not paid is not valued in our culture. I had some occasion to talk to quite a lot of Chinese a while back. And they would ask me questions about this whole subject. And I would illustrate to them this way, why I made my choices. They would have on watches, and I would say, which is more important, you or your watch? And of course, what a ridiculous question, you know, is, why? And why would you ask such a question? See, if you are more important than your watch, are you not more important than the making of the job of, I don't mean the person that's making the watch, but are you not more important then than the making, the manufacture of that watch? Or let's escalate it up the scale. Let's talk about the designer of a Rolex watch. Are you not more important than the job of designing Rolex watches? And if you are more important than that job, your child, a human being, is more important than designing Rolex watches. Is not the job then of building a human being more important than designing Rolex watches? I'm not talking about while the baby's still in the womb. I'm talking about after the baby's born, turning that baby into a worthwhile, God-fearing human being. Isn't that of more value than being the designer of a Rolex watch? And they, of course, and all their women work. I mean, that's government policy. You work. Their little children go on the streets, little children, tugging each other's garment, the one in front of them, with their nurse walking in front of them, the daycare person, because they're out on their outing for the day, walking the street, and then they go back to where they're kept. And they are kept not just 8 hours a day, or 10 hours, as some people are leaving their children in cases now. Some of those children stay in there all the beginning. And they could see the sense in that. They could appreciate that thought. One young man said, I think that is very noble to see the difference there. This is anecdotal, but it makes, it vividly illustrates what happened. A young woman, a Christian, sat in the rocking chair in the nursery at the church building after worship one day. We were talking. She held her young baby in her arms. And besides her interest in the baby, she was saying she was so eager to get back to work. She had a master's degree in early childhood development. Now then, her husband was well educated and had a good job. But she couldn't wait to get back and teach somebody else's children. Was it more important to be doing something for somebody else's children than her own baby? Was it the money? Her husband had a good job. Was it because she would waste her education if she stayed home taking care of her own child? That's a popular idea. Remember, Scott Burns said, our society doesn't value anything unless it brings home a paycheck. And I hear that. I'd waste my education if I didn't use it to get a paycheck. Remember liberal arts education? The idea was not primarily as a way to make a living. Now, somebody's got to make a living, and somebody's got to know enough about something to make a living. But let the mother be at home. And after all, is it of no benefit to her in her responsibilities to be educated? What better place for an educated woman to be than teaching the next generation? And to us who are Christians, what better place for an educated, God-fearing woman to be than to be rearing the next generation upon this earth and be an influence in this world? Her value is far above rubies. By the way, later on, months later, we were visiting in that young woman's home. Remember, she had a master's degree in early childhood development. She probably knew a lot of things I didn't know. But she was asking me for some help about something or other. I don't remember what it was about how to do about this child.
Did you tell her what she needed to do?
I suppose I don't even remember the end of it. But as a result of all of this prosperity and materialism, people desire more and more and better and better. And I hear from Christians' mouths, I can't live on my income anymore. It can't be done. I speak from some authority. It can be done. On preacher's salary, we are sending two at the same time. You can do what you want to do. You can figure out a way, in far most cases, you can figure out a way to do something if you want to do it badly enough. Marilyn Hardage, if some of you know of her, she would talk about in being economical in the way you live and using your money wisely. She would say you can't do everything. You have to make choices as to how you're going to spend your money. If the greatest thing in the world to you is to fill your bathtub full of water and take a hot, sudsy, soaking bath, okay, fine, do it, but you're going to have to cut down on expenses somewhere else. In other words, you can't do everything. You choose where you spend your money, whether it's expensive vacations, eating out at restaurants, boats, or whatever. And this is, you're going to have to choose. You can't do everything and live on one income and mother stay at home with the children. You're going to have to make a lot of cuts. And you figure out where you're going to do it. And you figure out a way to make it work. But you know, another problem has come along with that. Husbands have gotten used to the idea, and I like the idea. And husbands want their wives to work and bring in this extra income. And I feel sorry for a woman, a Christian, who has that problem, because it's going to take a lot of determination and wisdom to get that problem solved. And the husband thinks that way. Well, the next thing that came along was the influence of the feminists. Now some of the things that they stand for, we probably tend to think, well, they don't have very much of that accomplished yet. They're working on it, and I don't believe the effects of the women's movement have peaked yet. It will get worse. It is still growing, and where the end shall be, we don't know. Their idea of female gods, that the Bible should say she. We don't see that in our daily lives, in our conversations with other people, that a lot of people think like that. Well, the feminists are still working on it. And their idea that we must destroy love because love makes you vulnerable. And that marriage to men must be rejected because that is bondage. Their writings will make your hair curl. And they're working on these things. In the universities, the feminists, the women's courses, this is what they are. And it is affecting our young women. At the end, I may tell you about a conversation I had with a young woman, a Christian, Sunday morning after worship. It really disturbed me. The feminists say we really don't know how to raise children. If you want to talk about equality of opportunity for children, then the fact that children are raised in families means there is no equality. It's a dilemma. In order to raise children with equality, we must take them away from families and communally raise them. Another quote, "It is for this reason that one woman alone will not be fully liberated until all women are liberated." That's the explanation for all the propaganda about how wonderful it is to be independent and to be a career woman. Because we won't be all liberated until all the women are. So we've got to persuade everybody. Marriage has existed for the benefit of men and has been a legally sanctioned method of control over women. That must be destroyed. What you do see day in and day out is this. I meant to make a new copy here. This already copy is terrible. This is from a book, By Becoming Matriarchy, is its title, by two women. And there's a section in that book entitled, Goodbye, Goody Two-Shoes. I have one young woman that I've been studying with a great deal in the past months. She doesn't have any children yet. She's working in a government agency, and she tells me a lot about the thinking that goes on, the thinking of the employees that she works with and her female boss. And she says, this is true. This is just exactly how it is and how they think. Women without paid jobs are dependent. Women without paid jobs are dependent. Regardless of how competent, happy, loved as a wife and mother, she will never be equal to the wage earner as a dependent. The wage earner has power. And she said, yes, that is exactly what it is about. It is about power. And it always is said, well, it's because you can't afford to be only with one income. We need the money. She said, it's about power. I don't mean there's some people that don't need some money. Yes.
But the wage earner is dependent upon the job.
We will make that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes. Women must become wage earners in order to gain power. The old ideal of selflessness for husband and family will be replaced by the pace-setter type woman. She will be quite comfortable promoting herself and striving for her own gain. And this one woman said, volunteer work? To me, those women are time wasters, and I happen to feel my time is very, very valuable. What did Jesus say about service? The writings in the New Testament. Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. That was the lesson he was teaching. Service for each other. Striving for her own gain. She will be highly unlikely to help someone less fortunate. The worthy woman extended her hand to the poor. Her job will be on an equal footing with the home and the family. Her career is not a bit beneath her home and her family. She will be far more self-oriented than women today. The new measurement for women's status will be not her competence as a wife and mother, but how much she can accomplish for herself. What's in it for me will be her first question. Does that sound like the worthy woman? Does that sound like anything you read anywhere in the scriptures? The previously emphasized attributes such as niceness, sweetness, gentility. Did any of you in your newspapers and the comic strips get the Dilbert comic? Did you see last week for 3 days the person who writes that comic? Did you see it running on women and their cursing in the offices? He was attacking the first block, the first day. It ran for 3 days. The first block is a woman and 2 men sitting at the table of the office, and she is letting them know, if I get upset, if something pleases me, I will curse. And she gives them an example to show them what she means. And one of them's ears falls off. And the next day, she curses some more to show him some more. One's eyebrows fall off of the men. And he ran that thing for 3 days. But you see, and I could read the quotation right here. They actually advocate, the feminists do in their writings, that this is what you need to do. So, previously emphasized attributes such as niceness, sweetness, gentility, motherliness, all of which are other related. Praise the Lord that other related will be broadened to include attributes like competence. The worthy woman isn't competent. Intelligence. The worthy woman wasn't intelligent. Oh, yes, she was just poor dumb woman. Achievement. Strength. The very word strength is in her arms. All of which are self-directed. These competence, intelligence, achievement, strength, all of those will be self-directed. Now then, listen to this. When women gain this power, they will not wield it as men do, as an end in itself. Can you believe that after what they just said? They will not use it as an end in itself, but as a means exercised for the good of the group. Can you believe any of that? Of course not. It's a lie. And you notice it didn't say for the good of the family, or the good of the husband, or the good of the children. Now then, her garden, what that was all after is self. Listen to this. This woman writes her experiences in the days of Stalin in Russia. This is what was the propaganda that was presented to the women. Oh, by the way, If any of you women would like to leave and go down to that next session downstairs, I thought I'd be clear on this. Please feel entirely free to get up and leave if you wish to, because it's time for that one to begin right this moment. A meeting has been called, and that called means you be there. Your name will be put on the list if you're not present. A meeting has been called, and the speaker is saying, Soviet women, count your blessings. Before the October Revolution, you were nothing but sex objects to your male counterparts. As though with chains you were tied to monotonous, unrewarding housework, to the kitchen, to whimpering infants. You had to pay with sleepless nights and soiled diapers. That's all you knew in those old rotten days. And she says in some they're not buying this, but they have to, they're forced to. Now, Soviet women, you are free. Free to stand shoulder to shoulder with your men as equal partners in your daily toil. Now you toil diligently to please your Soviet state. Continue. So instead of self, now it's the state. On this Woman's Day, you must thank the Soviet government because it takes care of your children now. What is our government? What are forces in our government after? This is exactly. Isn't that perfect? On this Woman's Day, you must thank the Soviet government because it takes care of your children now. It provides you with day nurseries, with kindergartens, preschool care. It is educating your offspring in Soviet patriotism, turning them into dedicated Soviet citizens, while you Soviet mothers are free to pursue your worthwhile careers. To be fulfilled, proud mates to your Soviet men. You are no different from men when it comes to productivity. You are doctors, you are teachers, you are miners, you are loggers. You are no longer just women, you are toilers. Oh, that's right, picture whimpering infants and sleepless nights and soiled diapers is toiling. I guess that wasn't very good toiling. You are no longer just women, you are toilers. Let us continue to toil diligently, wholeheartedly, earning the respect of our beloved comrade Stalin, earning the respect of our beloved Communist Party. Hoorah! What's different? How in any way is that different except here the propaganda is, it is for you, it is for me. There the propaganda was, do it for the glory of the state. What about family? The government will take care of your children. That's where people are trying to hit this. And one book I have at the house that I've been reading lately, or actually I've not been reading, the title of it is Feminism is Not the Story of My Life. It's written by a woman, and from the standpoint of people who, we reject feminism. We just don't support a lot of the things in feminism. But you know what? That book is full of talking to young women and what are your goals? Talking to women and saying, what do you want for your daughters? What do you consider important for your daughters? And it is, I want them to be independent. I want to be independent. My goal is to get to the point where I do not have to depend on a man. Yes, I'm seeing that and hearing that everywhere. And is that a good thing? Eve was made for man. That is not independence. Eve was made for Adam. And then 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, verses 11 and 12, woman is of the man by creation, made from him. Man is by the woman, procreation. Man is born of woman. There is no such thing there as independence. Marriage is a unit. The two become one. It is an interdependent unit. But you know, the men, the bad men, took their freedom to have affairs, and they went to the bars and drank with their buddies, and they used the foul language. And the women took that as their example. They would have their affairs, and they would use the bad language. And they look for good examples. But in this idea of dependence or independence, and this striving for, I don't want to be dependent on a man, it was made for the man. And I wonder sometimes if man doesn't need a wife more than a wife needs a husband. You look at the statistics. Wives who are left widows survive better than husbands who are left as widowers. This is borne out in the statistics. Men tend to depend so much on their woman for companionship, for everything, and women are more versatile in their friendships and all. And now then, with the economic independence that women have ready access to, has that been a total blessing? Has it been any blessing? Woman now has no need to depend on men. She can make her own way, thank you, just fine. She can have any sexual desire she has in our world today. She's free to look for that wherever she wants, just as the men in our world are looked upon. She has no reason to need a man anymore. So is this, I really wonder if it's been a good thing in so many, many ways. It's destroyed families. Marriage is an interdependent unit, and then some people like to argue that subtracts from personality. I would argue it enhances, it nurtures personality. A woman whose goal is independence ought not to get married. If you want to marry, find a man you can depend on. But if you do want to get married, find a man that you can depend on. Another thing that is an enemy to the woman ruling her own household and taking care of those children is that with all of these things it has come to pass that, well, there it was in this, motherliness, previously emphasized attributes such as motherliness. Motherliness is not highly esteemed. Children are not highly esteemed. 1 Thessalonians, Paul is writing to the Thessalonians, and he's talking about his love for them. And he uses words. He compares his love to them to the love of a mother for her children. It is a beautiful picture of a woman's love for her children and how he speaks to these Thessalonians. The second chapter, 1 Thessalonians, verses 7 and 8. But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. He's gentle, as a woman is with her children, as a nursing mother. As she cherishes her children, you have become dear to us, as her children become dear to, affectionately longing for you. And the word cherish there has an interesting background. It originally was talking about to heat, to warm something, then to keep warm, then as birds covering their young with feathers. And it's used that way in the book of Deuteronomy, that as a bird keeps her young warm with her feathers, then it came to mean metaphorically to cherish with tender love, to foster with tender care. And you know, loving children is one of the traits which, when lost in a culture, dooms that culture. in the first chapter of Romans, in verse 31, where it characterizes the reasons that God gave up on that world. The long list of, Romans. Romans, the first chapter. And the word is in verse 31. The people did not like to retain God in their knowledge, and he gave them over to a debased mind. And one of the things of which they were guilty was they were unloving. Now, a lot of times people conclude that's talking about homosexuality. It is not. Homosexuality is the subject in earlier verses. This word here is the word for family love, storge. So the word here is storge, with the a prefix to put it in the negative. It's one of the traits of a culture that is going to contribute to God giving up on that culture. And you can readily see it developing in our culture. You hear the United States hypocritically condemn China's forced abortion, required abortion policies. How dare we condemn them? How dare we, with our choice for abortions? Can you imagine a conversation between two aborted babies? Let's say a Chinese baby and an American baby who had been aborted. The Chinese baby could say, my mother loved me. She wanted me desperately. They forced me. The American baby would have to say, my mother chose it. What hypocrites, this nation. Another evidence of motherlessness is not valued and children are not valued. There's a man by the name of Burton L. White, Ph.D. He was at Harvard in the 70s, I think it was. I used to hear a lot about him. He headed Harvard's preschool project. That was in the days that daycare was getting started. And listen to what he said. In the early 70s, with the rise of feminist ideas, we saw the beginning of extensive use of full-time substitute care for babies as young as 3 or 4 weeks of age. It is important to remember that the emergence of this practice was not in pursuit of a better way to raise babies, but rather for a better way to meet the newly perceived needs of young mothers. And do you ever see it claimed that it's a better way to raise babies? Yeah, Mrs. Clinton is part of that problem. And then to excuse all of this, the argument became very popular, and I heard men say such that shocked me, that it's the quality that matters of the time you spend with your children, not quantity. Quality time is what matters. 20 minutes? 30 minutes? An hour? And of course, in those situations where that's what you believe, it's the quality time that matters, then what's it going to be? Reading a nice book to your child? Well, that's a good thing to do. Take them to the zoo? That's a good thing to do, too. Quality time is what is required. And quality time is going to include reading the nice story, going to the zoo, handling problems, difficulties, learning lessons, living life, and learning what is good and what is right. I don't mean children need to be exposed to everything, but quality life is Mama being there, and all the countless things that come along, and those children learn from their mother. Again, if one doesn't care about motherless and children on the best of basis, do not get married and have children. In conclusion, I had overlooked that the passage in 1 Timothy 5 ends up by saying, You young widows marry their children, rule the household, and give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. We as Christians don't want to give anybody any excuse to speak reproachfully of Christ or of the gospel because of our choices and because how we behave. Of course, we live in a time when if we do what Christ requires, if we're not spoken of reproachfully, what we're doing to be held in disrespect, so be it. Don't be intimidated. But in concluding, I have several things that I would like to say, more than probably one should say in some concluding remarks. But there is such a thing as good independence. Independence for right and truth. Remember the Greek women of noble estate that Paul converted. It's written about in the 17th chapter of Acts. There in the city of Thessalonica, and then next in the city of Berea, it is pointed out that not a few prominent Gentile women believed. Not a few chief women of the city believed. They had already found the God of the Jews and were meeting with them in the synagogues. And Paul came along and they became believers in Christ. They had the independence to reject the world they were living in. They were living in a bad world. They were living in a world of degradation for women, for the family, idolatry, and they saw that was not good. They found the God of the Jews, and they found Christ. They were independent thinkers. And it's going to take independent thinkers today to see through the propaganda of the world and choose the good. The older women in Titus, the 2nd chapter. You older women, we older women, and you younger women have power to effect some solution. The older women were instructed, you become what you should be. You become reverent women. And it lists some very specific categories. That you may school the young women. And older women can be exceedingly valuable in encouraging young women and helping them learn the things they need to learn. And young women who would like some encouragement, who would like some instruction, should feel free to go to a woman and ask for it. Don't be intimidated to talk to people. And older women, we have to get acquainted with the young women in order to have influence with them. We have to be willing to spend some time with them. We have to show them that we are willing to talk with them. We have to give them opportunity. But you can have influence with them. You can be exceedingly valuable in this world. I want to tell you one story about a young woman that came to me. She was a visitor. She showed up during a meeting one day. Somebody had told her and invited her. She was a Christian. She had come from some other church in D.C., one of these vast numbers of churches inside the city. I didn't know that at the time. But anyway, she showed up, and it seemed as soon as the service was over, she made a beeline for me back there in the vestibule. And she started drilling me with questions just like a press person would handle an interview. And she was a career military woman. Had a little child, who's a person lived with, separated from her husband. Didn't find out that till later. But anyway, she drilled me. Who's your favorite character in the Bible? Remember I said she was supposedly a Christian from some church in the city. Who's your favorite character in the Bible? Well, I had no better sense than to say, I think I said, and it's hard for me to answer that sort of a question. How can you say? How can you say? Best I remember, I think I said Joseph. I think, now I might say Moses. Now I might say Joshua. I don't know. But anyway, I realized, I said a man. I said a man's name to this woman, obviously. This woman, she's a girl. And she was asking all these questions with an edge on her voice. And Dale walked by about that time. We'd already been talking for some time. And he walked by just about that time and overheard that piece of the conversation and said, well, remember Abigail Marlene? Well, yeah, I told her I had Abigail to my list because he knows me. And she went on and on. Well, did you work when your children were growing up? Away from home, obviously. She went no. Well, why? Well, were your children glad? Well, are you glad? Well, did you go to work after your children left? Well, no. Well, why? And I gave her all my reasons, and I have very good reasons. She finished her interview and departed. Well, we'll never see her again. 2 weeks passed, and she called me. She'd like to know if she could come over regularly and get study together. Don't be intimidated. Speak up. Make yourself available. Older women, any of you women, you can be useful to this generation. You can be valuable, more valuable than rubies. Young women, there's a story about somewhere read, a mother was going to have lunch with an older friend. And she wanted her daughter to go along. The daughter didn't want to go along to lunch with Mama and this old friend, but the mother rather insisted she wanted her to go, so she did. And afterwards, the young girl said she was impressed with this older woman. She was highly impressed with her. And she told her mother. And her mother said, I'd like to be like her when I'm an old woman. And she said, you better start mixing your colors now. That's what Titus was to teach the older women to become. You can be enormously useful in the kingdom. I have 2 heroes. Mrs. Irvin Lee, some of you know, and Mrs. Robert Hardage, Marilyn Hardage. They've been extremely useful in the kingdom. And their lives have been full and busy and rewarding and productive in the kingdom. And in closing, too long closing. In 1 Corinthians, the 16th chapter, and verse 13, and I think this is nifty to close with. Paul there writes to them in closing out that epistle to them, quit you like men. Be strong. The proverbial manliness of strength and courage. He wasn't talking to just males. He was talking to all those Christians at Portland. Including the women. Quit you like men. Thank you very much.
We have a lot of time on motions. Okay, I'd like to see us do this just a little bit. As the world goes, so does the people.
This is true. This is true.
All right. I am finding it difficult to be, I don't know how to say it, but the fact that I'm see. We have, and you're training me. We've talked about it. Maybe, I don't know what men talk about. Maybe. Somebody. But, emphasis seems to be on having a woman straighten up all this mess that we've gotten into. But the reason we've got that clean into this situation, to me, a lot of it is because men have failed to be heads of homes, responsible, to be like well, let's just take your fathers, where you dealt with very deeply. And it says, her husband also, he praises her saying, how much praise does any woman get from her husband on a daily basis?
Understand?
No wonder it's driving them
That's
out of the
something that
homes.
Well, it shouldn't even so. It shouldn't even so. I understand what you're saying.
I know two wrongs don't make a right.
Mhm.
I understand. And I understand that by doing a little about it, maybe we can change that attitude. But too often, I want to see men that are just not, I don't know if it's capable or they don't want to deal with it.
I know what it is. This is what it is.
You and I have husbands who we have been able to depend on, who stick in hand, we knew even do that.
You know what it is? Men have become wimps. Men are no longer the leaders. They're quit you like men, be strong. The proverbial trait of manliness, of strength, has in congregation after congregation, we have seen the big problem is lack of leadership. The men will not get up and be leaders. And it so happened in the home, the men will not be leaders. They have relinquished the role, so many of them.
And that's what's happening to the world. You don't understand? Men have stopped being statesmen or whatever we call them, you know. And no wonder women can do it better.
Yeah.
Well, we can
I'm
work
not
on
saying-
what women ought to be. And if we can affect to make women be what they ought to be, that's going to have an influence to cause men, the men that we influence, to be what they ought to be. But there's out there, yes, I see it vividly. It's lack of leadership among men. There, in fact, a number of years ago, Working Woman magazine had an article by a career woman who was exceedingly successful in her career. There's something else now. I can remember that. She, and now this goes back 10, 11 or 12 years ago. It's hard to remember all the points she made. But her basic problem was this. She had been an executive for a number of years, very, very successful. And now then, after however many long years it is, she decided she would like to get married. Oh, my God. She would like to get married now. And she looked around her and realized she had a problem. All the men of strength that she admired and respected were already married. And their wives were at home running the household. Now that's what Working Woman magazine and this executive had to say. Their wives were at home running the household. They were strong leadership men. And what her cry was, I'm left with nothing but wimps to choose from. The only unmarried ones, the wimps. So do I marry a wimp and make do with that, or do I remain unmarried? And so, yes, this is true. And so, and I was talking to a young woman after worship Sunday morning. She is from a southern state, of course, it's down there in full force too. She is working here in the city, a very elite. She finds herself in a very elite position. She's only 16 years old. 16. I won't go any further with her. I never want to identify the girl. But she's a sweetheart in some ways. We talked about a whole lot of things, where she'll go to school, and she wants to go to a small college and maybe a women's college. Great. Oh, that'd be great. Or even just any small college if it's co-educational. Okay, fine. What about Florida College? Well, they don't offer what I want. Well, what do you want? I want criminal law. Oh, you want a life of crime? I said, she didn't get it. Anyway, she wants to be a criminal law attorney, prosecutor. Now remember, she's only 16 years old right now. And I would not be encouraging her to run out looking for a husband anytime soon. But what I worry about with her, and what gave me a new worry, for the future is my reflections upon after I talked with her. She was very clear that she doesn't want to get married for a long time. Anything wrong with that? No, not really. Or she might never get married. Anything wrong with that? Certainly not. We may get married, or we can choose not to. It's indifferent. But what I'm worried about is, you see, the idea you can be what you want to be. Girls have been filled with this idea you can do anything you want to do. You can be a wife and mother and a brain surgeon. You can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you want to do. And this is a very bright girl, and you know she has been pushed right along and put into the highest courses. And so she's going to be a prosecutor, and she doesn't want to get married for a long, long time, if ever. And this is what scared me. She said, because I want to do what I want to do. I want to do what pleases me. I want to do what I want to do. Okay, but what does that mean? She doesn't want anything else to have. She wants this exciting life. No. And then she said, Are you all hearing the word anal a lot lately as an adjective? I have been hearing it lately, and I thought, where is this word coming from? The source of the word has to be a certain body orifice. I looked it up, finally thought of it last night in the dictionary. It does not give, it does not give in the dictionary the meaning, the use in which it's now being used as an adjective to describe my behavior or my upset, my dis-ease. But that is where it's coming from. And to a group of women, I would say, I would not mix company and use the word. I find it distasteful. But she said, I would get anal if I didn't get to do what I want to do. And I went away thinking, all right, so if she becomes a prosecutor, you know, to be successful with that, and you're not going to want to leave that after 2 or 3 years. You've got to get yourself established and make a name for yourself to have any fulfillment in it. So, okay, you know what's going to happen to her? She's going to end up the same way as that woman in Working Woman magazine, when then sometime when she gets ready to get married, maybe 20 years down the line, who will she be left with? Nothing but limps. Well, okay, that's her choice. If she doesn't want to get married ever, that's fine. In her circumstance, in fact, I would say that'll be best. That will be best, I hope. If she retains her present attitude, I hope she never gets married. But there's another observation to make from all of that. That just gave me a little window of insight into what is happening to these young women. You can do anything you want to be. You can be anything you want to be. And what will happen to our culture if women make this decision broadly? What will be the effects of the world that your children will live in and your grandchildren? How can you put yourself into subjection to a wimp? He's not believing.
They don't have any That's a strong point. We've already reached this point. What is the wisdom? It's not coming out of home. It's coming out of just that point. That's not a home that God.
And that's all because of breakdown of family. Women went to work. Marriages fell apart.
A couple tidbits. Traditionally, ladies' classes have been to improve us as wives and mothers. Men's classes have been to teach them to preach and lead singing. So they are not prepared. People who want to serve God are not prepared in studying what the Bible says about how to be husbands and fathers. I think that trend is reversing. I think I see in bulletins and magazines and personal experience that there are more classes now for men help them to be better fathers and to be better husbands. That's very good.
It's
Are
getting
you
bad enough
familiar-
that they see the need.
Are you familiar with Brenda Hunter? I cannot remember the title of her book, but she wrote a book several years ago. She is a child psychologist. She was a career woman. She had a child or two, and she began to study behavior in daycare and how
Oh, yes, yes,
aggressive
I've seen
and
it.
out of control. And she changed her life, and she has done